Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan has issued an intent to challenge the court ruling exempting some public facilities from load shedding. We're talking clinics, hospitals, police stations, schools. So should government appeal, and what should be made of this response by the Public Enterprises Minister? Let's get you some analysis on the situation there. Advocate Paul Hoffman is the Director of Accountability Now, and he joins us via our video link this morning. Advocate Hoffman, it's great to see you. Does Pravin Gordhan have a point that as much as government wants to exempt these public facilities from the load shedding schedule, it would put too much pressure on the grid?
Well, I don't think that that's a good point. Thank you, Michelle, and good morning to your viewers. What the judges have done in this case is invoke a basic principle of our Bill of Rights, which is that the state must protect, respect, promote, and fulfill all of the human rights that are guaranteed to all of us in the Bill of Rights. And the facilities that you mentioned in the intro are all facilities that are there to see to it that we are kept safe and secure, that our bodily and psychological integrity remains intact, that we get our basic education, which is not hedged about in any way, it's a full-on right, and that we get access to health care. It's true that in the case of health care, the measures that the government is obliged to take can be restricted by the availability of resources and ought to be progressively realized. Mm-hmm. The problem with this appeal is going to be around what lawyers call the polycentricity of decision-making, which means that the judges are looking at it with tunnel vision just at the legal problem in front of them, whereas the government has to govern the whole country. Yeah. But that's not going to wash in this case, because available resources would include the loot of state capture. It doesn't help to come to court and say we've got no money to put the schools, the hospitals, the police stations off the grid, whether that is with solar or with a generator for a small police station, whichever is the most suitable, using gas for the ovens at the home economics classes at school instead of electricity when the scholars are learning how to cook and to bake. All of those things can be done if you regard available resources as including the loot of state capture. That is more than R1 trillion, and R1 trillion will do very nicely to effect implementation of the order that has been granted by the full bench in the Gauteng High Court. That doing that, raking back loot, simple as that. If I give your listeners an early morning 3-4 letter word recipe for this case, it is rake back loot. The government has had absolutely no inclination to get on with the business of raking back loot. The difficulty is that the loot is offshore, but there are many organizations worldwide who make it their business to see to it that loot is raked back, and the South African government ought to be engaging with them in order to get the more than R1 trillion that was stolen by accused number one, which the president says is the ANC itself, back into the coffers of the country so that the judgment of the court can be properly implemented.
Yeah, I mean, state capture never far away from the challenges that we face in our country. And electricity and Eskom, certainly the state capture narrative plays so intricately to where we are now. But also what the High Court had to say, Advocate Hoffman, in this decision was that this is government's failure of its constitutional mandate in the first place. This failure to keep the lights on in hospitals, in schools, in clinics, in police stations, because it is that constitutional imperative, the rights contained in the Bill of Rights that we are all entitled to: safety, healthcare, education.
Those are the rights that have been invoked by the court. It's important that your viewers should know their rights and claim their rights. On the strap, I hope, the web address of Accountability Now is available, and one can download a handbook on the Constitution that explains why it is that the state must respect, protect, promote, and fulfill all of the rights in the Bill of Rights. Minister Gordhan is going to have to join the dots between the accused number one status of the ANC, the trillion rand in loot, and the failure of government to take any available steps to rake back loot. That is what needs to happen. And his arguments about polycentricity and about the inability of the government to find the money to put solar panels on the roofs of schools or generators in the small police stations around the country, or indeed a supply of electricity in our hospitals, simply falls flat when the availability of the loot to be frozen and forfeited by those involved in the looting is brought to the front of the stove. There is no political appetite in this government to do the necessary raking back of loot, and that means that reform of the criminal justice administration is needed so that it is capacitated to take on serious corruption without fear, favor, or prejudice. And that means getting a lot of people who are either within the ANC structures or friendly towards the ANC structures to be held accountable as accused number one in the whole state capture debacle.
Yeah, certainly. If anything, let's hope this sort of lights a fire under the people who need spurring on to deal with the kinds of challenges that you've just outlined. Advocate Paul Hoffman, let me thank you for your time this morning, the Director of Accountability Now. And as he says, if you have any doubts as to what your rights are as enshrined in the Constitution, you can head on over to Accountability Now's website.